Welcome back. So Trevor Phillips joins me now to discuss his political interviews this morning. But I said sir because you're normally a knight of a different realm, and here you are with me in the glass box on a Sunday morning because of some technical issues in our Westminster studio this morning. But, you know, every cloud. It's good to see you.
I quite like the way you describe it. I've always wanted to them to give me a programme. I said, why don't you call my programme A Night at Sky, which... I don't know why it didn't go down.
I like it. It's a play on the sky at night. I like it. I like it.
Anyway, never mind. It's good to be invited into your parlour.
This isn't my parlour. I'm just shoved here of a weekend and hope that people are watching. Let's talk about the year we've had. Not you and I bantering away like we do every Sunday morning, but the year for Labour. As you look back on the ups and downs, and plenty of Labour supporters will say there have been ups, they have done some things, and we've seen more recently the plans for the NHS receiving support from across the political spectrum by and large, but also the downs, the perceived U-turns, the rebellions. What's your assessment, Trevor, of the past year of a Labour government?
Well, it is not particularly clever to say that they came in with high hopes, enormous majority and so on and so forth, and that in the last week we've seen the reversal on winter fuel, we've seen the problems with the welfare benefits, we've seen more than just the money, but we've seen the what is the woman issue, and we've seen the change on grooming gangs. And the problem I think that has emerged over the last year is that, and Tom Baldwin, Keir Starmer's biographer, I think, said this rather well on the programme, that the thing that benefited them most ahead of the election, which was not having a story other than Tories are bad, we can't possibly be worse, didn't benefit them afterwards, because people then said, OK, got rid of the Tories, now what are you about? And it appears that they didn't know, and they did things which they then have had to reverse, and they said things which they've now had to unsay. I include, for example, you know, and it's some of it is actually recent. The thing that's really odd is that if you'd said something last July and now you have to reverse it, but Prime Minister less than a couple of months ago made this speech about island of strangers, we've got to have more integration and so on. 3 weeks later, oh, that was a terrible mistake, even though it was a big speech. Somebody must have thought about it, and the worst thing was to say, oh, I hadn't read it properly. So all of this has added up to the idea, that the feeling that, as I think Neil Kinnock or one of the others said, this is a government that feels rudderless.
Yeah. And also, well, all smiles, semi-smiles, you could say, between Keir Starmer and his Chancellor Rachel Reeves there. But at Prime Minister's Questions this week, arguably the political image of the week was Rachel Reeves not just shedding a tear, in tears for much of PMQs, and he didn't seem to notice.
Well, I think what is probably fair to say is that nobody particularly distinguished themselves on that day.
Yeah.
None of us knows what was going on for Rachel Reeves, and I'd say personally, I accept her explanation at face value that there was something she doesn't want to talk about, and I know I'm unusual in this. I do not think it's any of our business. I also don't think, as somebody who has literally on this programme blubbed on air, I don't think it's that big a deal, to be frank. But I do think that not everybody seemed to have the empathy, either on her own side, or I should say, to be honest, on the other side. I think that whatever Kemi Badenoch's people may feel about the way that she pointed, as it were, to the Chancellor's distress, I think that the pure political fact of it is that I don't think that will have helped her very much. I think it will stick in people's memory as somehow a little bit less than sympathetic. So I don't think that was an episode that played well for anybody. most of all, I suppose, one has to say, it has to come back to the government's own narrative. And as pretty much everybody on the programme was saying this morning, in the absence of a very strong, positive narrative, all of these things count for more than perhaps they should.
And that was definitely the accusation, as you start off saying, Trevor, pre-election. What is the narrative? What's the direction? There was a vacuum of that now, and they seem to be struggling to fill that one since. What it means at the end of this week is not only is there less political capital for the government, there is just less capital, less to spend, because the welfare bill didn't come up with the £5 billion worth of savings they wanted to. And that prompted questions from you to Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson about things that they have suggested they would like to do, cutting the two-child benefit cap, versus things that they actually can do, which perhaps isn't that. Here's what she had to say.
It is the moral mission of this Labour government to make sure that where you're from doesn't determine what you can go on to achieve. And too many children in our country right now grow up in poverty, and we're determined to change that. But we're not waiting around for that. We've already expanded free school meals eligibility. I have also always been clear, as has Liz Kendall, that through the work that we're doing, we will look at measures in the security system, as well as every way we can lift children out of poverty. But I've also been consistent in saying that any change like that does, of course, come with a big cost. And we have to do any change in policy, any change of any description, we have to be clear about how we're paying for that and how that's going to be delivered.
Yeah, Bridget Phillipson is actually one of the government's, if you like, more persuasive advocates.
Yeah.
But I think you can see pretty clearly the problem that they have is that they say the country's got huge problems. We've inherited this from the Tories, there's the black holes, there's a broken system, and so on and so forth. And then they come up with solutions which are nothing wrong, for example, with breakfast clubs in and of themselves. There's nothing wrong with more scanners and maybe some hubs and so on. But it doesn't feel like the solutions that the Starmer administration is offering are anything like the scale needed to tackle the kind of level of problem that they're describing. And I think that is perhaps the key to the sense of disappointment that's surrounding them.
The thing they have done at scale is investment in defence, is the foreign stage. And this isn't a question just about Keir Starmer, but about all prime ministers we've seen, perhaps since Margaret Thatcher, is the foreign stage seems to be sometimes a place of solace, doesn't it?
It does, and it's lots of prime ministers, that striding the world stage is a great thing, and but they tend to do it slightly later in their terms of office, or than you would think. I mean, Margaret Thatcher spent the first 4 or 5 years on domestic policy, deregulation, all those kinds of things before she started to become, Ronald Reagan's partner.
Although she usefully had the Falklands War, didn't she? That served her well,
all of that. Tony Blair, public service reform from 1997, before he, started to wage war and whatnot. The Prime Minister, who has, in a sense, become his own Foreign Secretary from day one, is an unusual thing. And I think whether this is fair or not, I think it probably is not fair, but politics is not fair, has created the sense that he is spending more time and more energy trying to do something about Ukraine, trying to do something about the Middle East, hanging out with Donald Trump, when there are all of these things that we have to deal with here, the NHS, the money, and so forth. And I have to say, I'm not sure it's paid that many dividends when the most important thing that's happened on the foreign stage in the last period, which is Donald Trump's assault on Iran.
Yeah.
We only got to know less than 60 minutes before they did it.
I'm sure if Number 10 are watching this, Labour supporters, they'll point to the US-UK trade deal, which the finer points are being done on now, his keeping together the coalition of the willing and being a part of NATO strengthening, not weakening, with Donald Trump at the table. Let's just bring it back to domestic politics. I know you asked Mel Stride, of course, the Chancellor's shadow, about her appearance at PMQs this week. He showed a human side, saying he texted her, asked if she was OK. So it's nice to see that in politics.
I think that was
human beings.
And it was unusual for somebody to say he had done that.
They're colleagues, effectively, even though they might disagree on a lot of things. But he was also asked about whether he thought she should be sacked. Here's what Mel Stride had to say.
I'm not going to start sort of saying whether she should come or go. I just think the whole government and the Chancellor is part of that. The Prime Minister is certainly very much part of it. Has been leading a pretty rudderless administration that has not got to grips with some of the serious challenges that we have as a country, has not delivered on the kind of growth that they were saying that they would do in the economy, has borrowed huge amounts of money, has stoked up inflation, kept interest rates higher for longer, is mounding up that national debt, and so on and so forth. And this is just a very, very poor track record. And I think you can point to several members of the front bench who really are not making the grade.
I'm interested, Trevor, just to finish off, as to whether the Tories are making hay while the sun shines. We've seen, obviously, Reform seize the initiative in the past 6 months, winning councils and mayors and another MP, although one of their MPs this week has had the whip removed while investigations are ongoing. But the Conservatives, you'd think there was an opportunity this week, the past couple of weeks, for them to capitalise on. Have they done that?
Not as far as we can tell. There's lots of argument about whether Kemi Badenoch does well at PMQs and so on, but the truth is most people don't pay attention at PMQs. I think that their problem is that Nigel Farage has all the attention and he uses it very effectively. People can say he's a joke, people can say this, that and the other, but the truth is that the country is taking him seriously. I think that Mel Stride's problem is his own leader. And if you look at the numbers, she took over in November last year, and the Tories' polling has fallen steadily since then. Whatever she's doing, and by the way, I think she's a plus for politics overall, authentic, sincere and so on, but whatever she's doing, it's not working. And if the Labour Party's had a bad year, I have to say the Tories haven't done much better.
Whatever you're doing works for me. It's certainly been working the past 10 minutes. Trevor, thank you very much indeed. Always a pleasure, and especially in person.
Good fun to be here.
Always. Come on. Look at that. Wow.